My name is Mia Sheffield, and my cousin once told her book club that I pet sat for rich people because I couldn't hold down a real job. This was 2 days after I'd commanded a tactical airlift operation that evacuated 300 civilians from a collapsing government in West Africa. The thing about being a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force is that most people have no idea what that actually means. They hear Air Force and picture someone checking boarding passes at an airport gate. My family certainly did. I'd been flying for the Air Force for 18 years, starting as a fresh second lieutenant with more ambition than sense, working my way through transport operations, combat zones, and eventually into command positions that came with crews of 40 and aircraft worth $200 million. By 42, I was a lieutenant colonel, leading strategic airlift missions across 4 continents. My cousin Vanessa knew I was in the military the way someone knows their neighbor does something with computers. Vague, unimpressive, easily dismissed. And I preferred it that way. See, there's a particular kind of freedom in being underestimated. When your family thinks you're barely scraping by, they don't ask probing questions, they don't dig into the details of your life. They make assumptions, and those assumptions become a beautiful smokescreen. Mia's traveling again, my aunt would say at family dinners, her tone suggesting I was backpacking through hostels. You know how she is, never settles down. I'd be in Qatar, coordinating with Allied forces, or Germany, overseeing NATO logistics, or Japan, managing Pacific theater operations. But, sure, never settling down. The game started when I was 35, newly promoted to major. I'd come home for Thanksgiving and mentioned I was between assignments. My uncle had clapped me on the shoulder with exaggerated sympathy. "Tough economy," he'd said, "even for you military types. But hey, at least you've got that government health care, right?" I'd just returned from 6 months in Afghanistan, managing supply chains for forward operating bases. The assignment I was between involved strategic planning for the Secretary of the Air Force. But I'd smiled and nodded. Yeah, the health care is good. That became my template. Give them just enough truth to sound plausible, then let them fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. The less I corrected them, the more confident they became in their narrative about my life. By the time I made lieutenant colonel at 39, a rank that put me in the top 5% of Air Force officers, my family had fully committed to their version of my story. Mia the drifter. Mia the commitment phobe. Mia who did something with planes, but never anything important enough to discuss at dinner parties. Vanessa, my cousin, had always been competitive. We'd grown up together, 2 years apart, constantly compared by well-meaning relatives. She'd gone the traditional route: college, marriage at 25, 2 kids, a pharmaceutical sales career that she'd put on hold to focus on family and community involvement. I'd gone to the Air Force Academy, spent my 20s in cockpits and command centers, and never looked back. She'd never forgiven me for it. It wasn't obvious at first. The jealousy wore the mask of concern. "Don't you want to settle down?" she'd ask over wine at family gatherings. "I mean, you're not getting any younger. Don't you want a real home?" I had a real home. A condo near Andrews Air Force Base that I barely saw because I was constantly deployed or training or coordinating operations across time zones. But she didn't need to know that. "I like traveling," I'd say. "Keeps things interesting." "But don't you get tired of it, living out of a suitcase?" I'd spent the previous month in a climate-controlled command center with a staff of 60, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Before that, I'd flown into Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where I had my own quarters and office with 3 computer monitors displaying real-time global logistics data. "It has its moments," I'd say. Vanessa would shake her head, her expression a perfect blend of pity and satisfaction. "I just think you deserve stability, you know? A real career with advancement opportunities." I was a lieutenant colonel. I commanded officers and enlisted personnel. I had a security clearance that granted me access to classified intelligence briefings. My last performance review had used words like exceptional leadership and strategic vision. But sure, no advancement opportunities. The delicious irony was that the more I deflected, the more elaborately they constructed their fiction. At one family reunion, my aunt had explained to her neighbors that I did freelance consulting for airlines. Close, I suppose. If you consider commanding tactical airlift operations during humanitarian crises to be consulting. The house-sitting thing started by accident. I'd mentioned once that I was staying at a place in Alexandria while I worked at the Pentagon for a 6-month assignment. My uncle had somehow transformed this into me house-sitting for someone. It's genius, really. He'd told his golf buddies at a family barbecue. Mia stays in rich people's houses when they're on vacation, free rent, and she gets to live in nice places. Not a bad gig for someone who never wanted a mortgage. I'd been staying in the home of a retired Air Force general who was in Europe consulting with NATO. He'd offered me his guest house while I was assigned to the Pentagon. It had 4 bedrooms and overlooked the Potomac. But sure, house-sitting. I'd learned to enjoy the absurdity of it. Every time someone expressed sympathy for my unstable lifestyle, I'd bite back a smile and think about the last time I'd briefed a room full of generals, or coordinated with allied command structures, or made decisions that moved millions of dollars in resources. Vanessa's wedding approached like a slow-motion train wreck I could see coming, but had no interest in stopping. She was remarrying. Her first marriage had ended quietly 3 years ago, though the family rarely discussed it. The new groom, Bradley, was a commercial real estate developer, with the kind of aggressive ambition that read as success to people who measured life in visible assets. The wedding was going to be enormous. 300 guests at the Willowbrook Estate, a historic mansion an hour outside D.C. that had been converted into an event venue. String quartet, 10-course meal, imported flowers, the works. My mother called 2 months before the wedding. "Vanessa would love for you to be there, honey. I know you're busy with your traveling, but this is important." "I'll be there, Mom. And try to look, put together." Vanessa's really stressed about everything being perfect. I just returned from Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, where I'd been overseeing Pacific airlift coordination. I had 3 dress uniforms in my closet that would have answered every unasked question about my career. "I'll wear something nice," I promised. "And maybe, could you be vague about the house-sitting thing? Bradley's family is very traditional, very successful. Vanessa just wants everyone to make a good impression." "Sure, Mom." The irony was that Bradley's father was a retired Navy captain. I outranked him by 2 pay grades. But who was counting? The week before the wedding, I was at McCain Air Force Base in Washington State, reviewing readiness assessments for our C-17 fleet. My phone rang during a briefing, my mother calling about final arrangements. "Mia, honey, you're still coming, right?" "Confirmed, Mom. I'll drive up Saturday morning." "Drive? Oh, honey, that's so far. Are you borrowing someone's car again?" I owned a car. A sensible sedan that I rarely drove because I was usually flying military aircraft or being driven in official vehicles. "Something like that," I said. "Well, be careful, and please, try to look successful. Vanessa keeps talking about how Bradley's family is very image-conscious." I'd spent the morning discussing operational readiness with a 2-star general, but sure, I'd try to look successful. The wedding day arrived with the kind of perfect weather that seemed specifically designed for outdoor photographs. I drove to the Willowbrook Estate in my civilian clothes, a simple navy dress, understated jewelry, minimal makeup. The uniform of someone who'd learned to blend in. The estate was spectacular. Manicured gardens, a Victorian mansion with wraparound porches, white chairs arranged in perfect rows on the lawn. 250 guests milled around in expensive clothes, drinking champagne, discussing portfolios and vacation homes. I found my mother near the reflecting pool, talking with Vanessa's mother-in-law-to-be. "Mia?" My mother kissed my cheek, then immediately straightened my collar as if I were 12. "You made it. Oh, Linda, this is my daughter Mia. She works in aviation." Linda was a striking woman in her 60s, dripping with diamonds and the kind of confidence that comes from never having worried about money. How lovely. "Are you a flight attendant?" "Something like that," I said, smiling. "It must be so exciting, all that travel, though I imagine it's exhausting. My nephew is a pilot for Delta. The hours are just brutal." My mother jumped in quickly, as if worried I might correct the misunderstanding. "Yes, Mia's always traveling. Never in one place for long. Very free-spirited." Free-spirited. That was a new one. We made small talk about the weather, the venue, Vanessa's dress. I was good at this, the art of saying nothing while seeming engaged. a skill honed over years of classified briefings where the most important information was never spoken aloud. The ceremony was beautiful. Vanessa looked radiant in a dress that probably cost more than a month's rent for most people. Bradley looked nervous but happy. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and building a life together. I stood in the back, watching, thinking about the C-17 crew I'd worked with last week. 20-year-old kids flying million-dollar aircraft into hostile environments. That was commitment. The reception was held in the mansion's ballroom, a soaring space with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. Round tables draped in silk, centerpieces that probably required a team of florists, and enough champagne to float a destroyer. I ended up at a table with distant cousins and family friends. The conversation flowed around me, discussions of stock portfolios, vacation homes in Nantucket, children at prestigious universities. "And what do you do, Mia?" asked the man to my left, a hedge fund manager named Preston. "I work in logistics," I said. "True enough." "Oh, supply chain management?" "Something like that." "Fascinating. It's the backbone of everything, really. Where are you based?" "I move around a lot." He nodded knowingly. "Consultant? My firm uses logistics consultants all the time. The good ones can name their price." I thought about my salary as a lieutenant colonel. Comfortable but not extravagant. Nothing like what he was imagining. "It pays the bills," I said. Vanessa made her rounds through the tables, glowing with champagne and attention. When she reached ours, she leaned down to hug me, her voice pitched high with performative affection. "Mia, I'm so glad you could make it. I know you're always so busy with your traveling." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. She lowered her voice conspiratorially, but not low enough. "I told Bradley all about your house-sitting thing. He thinks it's so clever. Very entrepreneurial." Preston's eyebrows rose. "House-sitting?" "Oh yes," Vanessa said, warming to her subject. "Mia lives in other people's homes when they're away. It's very practical. She doesn't have to worry about rent or mortgages. Very minimalist lifestyle." She said it like a compliment, but the subtext was clear. Poor Mia, who can't afford her own place, who drifts from house to house, living on the margins of other people's success. I smiled. "It works for me." "Oh, I think it's wonderful," Vanessa said. "Not everyone needs the whole white picket fence thing, right? You've always been so independent, so unconventional." She squeezed my shoulder and moved on to the next table. Preston looked at me with poorly concealed pity. That's quite a unique arrangement." "It has its perks," I said, sipping my champagne. The evening wore on. Dinner was served, filet mignon and Chilean sea bass, prepared by a catering team that had probably cost more than some people's cars. Speeches were made, toasts were raised, and Vanessa and Bradley cut a cake that looked like it belonged in an art museum. I was thinking about leaving when the music shifted. The DJ announced that the bride wanted to say a few words. Vanessa stood up, slightly unsteady from champagne, and clinked her glass with a fork. The ballroom quieted, 250 faces turning toward her. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," she said, her voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "This has been the most perfect day, and it means so much to have all of you here. Family, friends, everyone who's been part of our journey." Quote. She gestured around the room, her smile wide and genuine. "I especially want to recognize some special people, Bradley's parents, who've been so welcoming, my mom, who planned half this wedding, my best friends who've supported me through everything." She paused, scanning the room until her eyes landed on me. "And my cousin Mia. Mia, stand up." My stomach dropped. This wasn't part of the program. I stood slowly, aware of every eye in the ballroom turning toward me. Vanessa's smile was radiant, but there was something sharp underneath it. Something I recognized from childhood. The competitive edge. The need to establish hierarchy. "That's my cousin," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "She house sits for people, can you believe it? At her age, sleeping on strangers' couches." The ballroom rippled with uncomfortable laughter. Not mean-spirited exactly, but amused. The kind of laughter that comes from relief that you're not the subject of the story. I mean, I couldn't do it, Vanessa continued, her tone light but pointed. But Mia's always been so adaptable, so comfortable with uncertainty. It's really admirable, in a way. Not everyone can live like that. More laughter. Louder this time. Someone near the front whistled. Bradley's father, the retired Navy captain, laughed loudest, his voice booming across the ballroom. To each their own, right? Takes all kinds. I stood frozen, every muscle in my body taut. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for, in a twisted way, the moment where their fiction collided with reality. But I hadn't planned this, hadn't orchestrated it. I'd been content to let them believe their fantasy forever. Vanessa raised her glass. To Mia, who proves you don't need a mortgage to be happy? The room erupted in laughter and applause. People raised their glasses, toasting my imaginary poverty, my fictional instability. I opened my mouth to respond, though with what I had no idea. Denial would sound defensive. Laughter would seem complicit in my own humiliation. Then a voice cut through the noise. Actually, someone said from a table near the back, she outranks me. The laughter died like someone had cut a wire. I turned, my heart suddenly pounding. Colonel James Warren stood up from his table, setting down his champagne glass with careful precision. He was in his late 50s, Air Force dress blues, his chest decorated with ribbons that told a story of 3 decades of service. I had worked with him twice, once in Afghanistan, once on a joint task force at the Pentagon. I hadn't known he was here. The ballroom was absolutely silent now. 300 people frozen, trying to process what they'd just heard. Warren's expression was neutral, but his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of command. Lieutenant Colonel Sheffield is one of the finest officers I've had the privilege of serving with. She commands strategic airlift operations across multiple theaters and holds a security clearance that most people in this room couldn't imagine. He paused, letting that sink in. She's flown into combat zones, coordinated humanitarian evacuations, and made decisions that have saved lives. She reports to generals who report to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Vanessa's face had gone completely white. Warren turned to look at me, and despite everything, I saw the hint of a smile. Lieutenant Colonel, my apologies for blowing your cover, but I couldn't let that stand. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I met Warren's eyes across the room, gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. Then I turned to look at Vanessa. She stood at the front of the ballroom, microphone still in hand, her expression caught between disbelief and dawning horror. Around her, guests were turning to each other, whispering, checking their phones as if they could Google me and confirm the impossible thing they'd just heard. Bradley's father, the retired Navy captain who'd laughed loudest, looked like he'd swallowed his tongue. He knew enough about military rank to understand exactly what lieutenant colonel meant. To understand that his son had just married into a family where the house-sitter cousin outranked him. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. Preston, the hedge fund manager beside me, slowly turned to stare. You're a lieutenant colonel? Quote, U.S. Air Force, I said quietly. Strategic Airlift Command. Someone at the next table gasped. Another person started frantically whispering to their partner. Vanessa's mother-in-law, Linda, who'd asked if I was a flight attendant, had gone pale, one hand pressed to her throat. The silence stretched, painful, absolute. Then Bradley cleared his throat, trying desperately to salvage the moment. Well, that's certainly unexpected. Let's hear it for our military service members. A few people clapped weakly. Most just stared. Vanessa set down the microphone with shaking hands and walked off the small stage, her eyes not meeting mine. Bradley hurried after her, his expression mortified. The DJ, sensing the need to fill the awful silence, started the music again. Conversation slowly resumed, but they were all about one thing. I could feel it, the shift in the room's attention, the whispers, the sideways glances. I sat back down. Warren appeared at my table a moment later. Lieutenant Colonel, Sorry to crash your family reunion. Colonel Warren, I stood, shook his hand. I didn't realize you were here. Bradley's cousin. Navy family. You know how it goes. We all end up at each other's weddings eventually. He smiled. Though I have to say, I wasn't expecting the floor show. Neither was I. For what it's worth, your cover was solid. I had no idea until she started talking about house sitting, and I put two and two together. Realized you were the Sheffield I'd worked with at the Pentagon. I laughed. A short, sharp sound. I didn't mean to keep it a secret. They just assumed, and I never corrected them. Best kind of operational security, he said. Hide in plain sight. He excused himself back to his table, leaving me alone with Preston, who was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You're really a lieutenant colonel? He asked. 19 years in the Air Force. And the house-sitting thing? I was staying in a retired general's guest house while I worked at the Pentagon. Somehow that became me sleeping on couches. He shook his head slowly. Jesus, your cousin must feel like an idiot. I looked across the ballroom. Vanessa stood near the windows with Bradley, her back to the room, her shoulders rigid. Even from here I could see she was crying. I should have felt triumphant. This was the reversal, the moment where the underestimated proves her worth, where the truth shatters the comfortable fiction. Instead, I felt tired. Tired of the game, tired of the pretense, tired of watching people construct elaborate fantasies about my life because I'd been too amused by the absurdity to correct them. My phone buzzed. A text from the Operations Center at Andrews, potential deployment next week, scheduling meeting Monday 0900. Right, back to reality. The one where I commanded crews and coordinated logistics and made decisions that actually mattered. I finished my champagne and stood. Leaving already? Preston asked. Early morning tomorrow, I lied. I made my way through the ballroom, navigating around clusters of guests who fell silent as I passed. Near the exit, my mother intercepted me. Mia, her voice was small, why didn't you tell us? You never asked, Mom. But we all thought. I know what you thought, I squeezed her hand. It's okay. It's not okay. We've been, oh God, all those things we said. It's fine, really. She looked at me with eyes that suddenly saw a stranger. Who are you? I smiled sadly. The same person I've always been. You just weren't paying attention. I walked out into the cool evening air, leaving behind the ballroom and the whispers and the shattered remains of Vanessa's perfect day. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Andrews, this one marked urgent. I got in my car and drove away from the Willowbrook estate, from my family's assumptions and their comfortable fictions. The roads stretched ahead in the darkness, and I thought about the C-17 waiting at Andrews, about the next mission, about the real work that had nothing to do with anyone's opinion of my success. The truth was, I'd enjoyed being underestimated, had enjoyed the secret knowledge that while they pitied me, I was living a life they couldn't imagine. But the game was over now. And strangely, I felt lighter.